Through service to our nation, every veteran is entitled to a government-issued tombstone.
You see them at every graveyard, but Forest Hill Cemetery was short one until now.
In this week's Holding On to History, Dave Anderson tells us about a cemetery volunteer who couldn't let a World War I vet remain forgotten.
World War I newsreels had only recently faded from the silver screen when Army veteran Helmer Eriksson fell ill with tuberculosis. The Swedish immigrant died at an opening sanitarium in October 1919 with no friends or family to lay him to rest in the veterans section of Forest Hill Cemetery in Duluth. Eriksson had no marker either until Kathleen Cargill took notice. Don't confuse her with the billionaire of similar name who has been buying Park Point property.
It is very confusing. I keep a chart of all the offers that I've received in the last year.
This Cargill is a volunteer at Forest Hill Cemetery keeping monuments clean.
My team and I have been working here for 2 summers. I think we've cleaned about 325 monuments.
When Kathleen discovered Helmer Eriksson had no marker, she contacted Congressman Pete Stauber to get an official government tombstone.
This is how we as Americans take care of our veterans, and we will never forget.
105 years to the day after his death, Eriksson was honored with a traditional 3-volley salute as his official monument was erected. The project was part of Cargill's application process to join the Daughters of the American Revolution organization.
This project of cleaning the graves was Kathleen's special project as part of her new member course.
In the course of this project, Cargill discovered 2 other vets who need markers. And she and her helpers will be working especially hard now to clean up Civil War vet graves for next year's 160th anniversary of the end of the war between the states.
It is absolutely essential that we remember who came before us and who fought for our country.
Holding on to history in Duluth, Dave Anderson, Northern News Now.
The Daughters of the American Revolution have chapters in Duluth and Superior. And the group is proud of its relief efforts on the home front and the battlefield during World War I and beyond.